Well, here we are back again, and before we talk to President James Madison, we're going to talk to Kyle Jenks. Kyle Jenks is a historic performer. He performs, he's been on the History Channel, he's been on a number of programs because he is well-versed in the history and also can present the persona of it. So I'm going to go to Kyle Jenks first and ask Kyle how you got started.
Well, I think it started with a hobby of reenacting, which morphed into outdoor historical drama, which you may know of the show Drums Along the Mohawk, outdoor drama. And then it morphed into a historically inspired figure named Douglas McKenna. And then it morphed into a real historical persona in President Madison.
And you've done others as well, and I saw a clip on the History Channel where you played a German, I think, even.
Yes, I played a German on a Nazi program, and just last night I was on Legends and Lies, the Patriots, and I played that dastardly fellow, that George Grenville, who created and implemented the stamp tax.
The stamp tax. Well, we'll learn a little bit more about that. So you do appear in the area as a historical figure, obviously. And is this your favorite?
Oh, yes, for sure.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a moment and have a little time machine here. And we're going to speak with President James Madison. He was our fourth president and served from 1809 to 1817, if I recall correctly. Is that correct?
Well, I hope so, madam. And that's if I do finish out my term appropriately at 65. I didn't know as a child if I would make it past 20, but luckily I'm sitting here as your president, serving out my second term, and for all of those gentlemen out there that are casting a vote for the next president, it shan't be me, and I'm encouraging the vote to go to my Secretary of State, Mr. James Monroe.
Well, you've had James Monroe in your cabinet a number of times.
Indeed, yes, he's currently my Secretary of State. He did serve a short period of time as my Secretary of War, and he also served in ambassadorships overseas in London and in Paris.
Now, you also had the unfortunate situation of losing vice presidents. Is that correct?
Oh, goodness, yes. Well, currently I have no vice president. Mr. Elbridge Gerry passed away in 1814, a couple of years ago. But I am not averse to filling in when necessary. And in fact, here, now that I've been able to have a foray in our northern states here and meet you fine citizens in New York, I can mention that my first vice president was a carryover from Mr. Jefferson's administration and your governor, George Clinton.
You know, it's very interesting. You're originally from, well, not originally, you're from Virginia, of course, and you went to school in, what, New Jersey? What
Yes,
made you
ma'am.
choose New Jersey?
Well, that was on the advice of my father. You see, as I had mentioned before, my physical constitution was not that strong as a youth. Although I did serve in my father's militia, in the Orange County militia, when the American Revolution played out, I was really did not have the fortitude to go into the military service. So most of my colleagues went to the College of William and Mary, but my father said, "Jemmy, we're not going to send you to the College of William and Mary. You might get the yellow fever." And besides that, it's declined there, much debauchery to be had. And he was quite a fan of a Dr. John Witherspoon up at the College of New Jersey in Princeton. And he said, "You'll get much..."
It's now known as Princeton, by the way, if I can speak for mine.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I know it's located in Princeton, so that seems a reasonable name for it in the future. But when I attended, it was called the College of New Jersey. And a number of my friends maintained a lifelong friendship with them, and I graduated in 2 years, stayed for a third year. I graduated in a 4-year program in 2 because I just loved books so much I couldn't stop studying.
Well, and you are known as the father of the Federalist Papers, the Constitution. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, yes, I did have quite a bit to do with the United States Constitution and how we run our government today. And I must say that although I'm not a boastful man, we're approaching our 30th anniversary of the United States Constitution. And there are some members in the Delegates Convention who were not confident that the United States Constitution could survive. George Washington was one of them, and he said that if this document lasts for 20 years, we'll be doing a good job. So, Mr. Washington, we are in almost our 30th year now, and Dr. Benjamin Franklin had his reservations, but as you know, that Mr. Washington chaired the Delegates Convention, and there was a special chair that he sat in. And on the back was carved an engraving of a sun. But right through the middle of the sun in a horizontal line, you could not really tell if the sun was rising or setting. And by the end of the convention, Dr. Franklin stood and he said, although some of the tenets I do not agree with, I can say for sure that we have a rising sun.
A rising sun.
And not a setting one.
Wonderful, wonderful. What are the Federalist Papers? I know that you wrote them. Tell us about them.
Well, the Federalist Papers were written anonymously by Publius, and they were a series of essays written in very quick order in New York City in order to help convince New York to ratify our United States Constitution. Just because the signers put their signatures to the document didn't mean that all the states were going to agree with it. And I find it quite ironic that arguably our two most powerful states, Virginia and New York, were very late to sign and ratify the Constitution. Virginia at number 10, closely followed a month later by New York. So Mr. Hamilton, being the only delegate, by the way, from New York at the Delegates Convention the year before, in 1787 in Philadelphia, Mr. Lansing and Mr. Yates left the delegation, never to return on July 10th. So even though Mr. Hamilton cast his vote, it could never count. Because the other two delegates were not there.
Yeah.
So Mr. Hamilton and myself and others were concerned about the ratification, and so I did come to New York City, which we considered a headquarters of sorts, while Mr. Hamilton was in Poughkeepsie, and the ratification process was quite virulent, and our own Mr. Clinton, who became my vice president, was opposed to it, and even my vice president, Elbridge Gerry, did not sign the United States Constitution.
Oh, my.
So it is a record, I believe, of true Republican virtue when members of differing opinions, all intelligent men, can be respected for those different opinions and still be able to work together.
And what I have to say about your cabinet and your the government, you were able to work together, even though there was the differences in thinking and how our country is going to progress.
Yes, we had to forge through an invasion by Great Britain, as you probably are aware. And we did sign a treaty last year called the Treaty of Ghent, and two of my main ambassadors, Mr. John Quincy Adams and my Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Albert Gallatin, were delegates over in Ghent to sign the treaty. And there was a battle up in Plattsburgh, New York, on September the 13th, 18 and 14, which was the conclusion of the war and served to be very influential at that bargaining table.
And of course you were president during that time, so of course 1814, right?
Indeed, and even though the technical term for the agreement was status quo ante bellum, which means the country will remain as it was prior to the war, the country embraced it as a victory, which I'm very, very happy for. And therefore, I have to say that I'm enjoying a modicum of popularity right now.
And I'm very pleased to see that, Mr. President. And I understand that you have a wife. And
yes.
You married a little late in life, didn't you?
Oh, indeed. I was 43. Mrs. Madison is 16 years my junior, and she's doing very well in Montpelier, taking care of my mother and a full house of nieces and nephews and whatever other guests that we are entertaining.
What a marvelous woman.
Mrs. Madison is an exceptional woman, and it is no one can say a bad thing about Mrs. Madison, and the opposite is also true. Mrs. Madison is known for not saying a bad word about anyone.
That is remarkable.
It is remarkable.
Because many times you don't have good thoughts about people, but she knows, right? She knows how to be the First Lady.
She is the First Lady. In fact, when Mr. Jefferson, a good friend of mine, perhaps you're not aware that we have enjoyed a lifelong friendship, was in the President's mansion alone with his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Mrs. Madison stepped in and said, I shall perform some duties for you to elevate your office, and she'll do some entertaining here.
How wonderful, how wonderful. What a lovely woman she is, yes. And she has a son, I understand.
Yes, I have a stepson, John Payne, and many, many nieces and nephews.
How wonderful. President James Madison, it's been a pleasure to learn more about your personal life and also the trials and tribulations that you've had to go through by losing a vice president and many of the other things, wars and battles, and you've just been able to rise above that and be going to be one of our famous presidents.
Oh, that is too kind,
Yes,
madam.
yes, we will see you in the history books, I'm sure.
Oh, well, whether it's good or bad, I'm sure I'll be there.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Kyle Jenks as President James Madison. I want to thank you, Kyle, for being here today. You've done a wonderful job.
It's a pleasure, madam.
Still the president. First time I've had the president hold my hand. It's really exciting.